In this video, I want to talk to you about rough lumber and planed lumber and how rough gets to be planed and smoothed sometimes. So come on over and take a look at this. This is a piece of red oak and it's rough. And this is a piece of white pine and it's planed. Now this piece of wood used to look like this piece of wood before it was run through some kind of a machine like this. Actually, it would have been a much larger machine because this was made at an industrial sawmill. And this is a planer for planing rough lumber, and I'm going to show you how it works. But this is what's called a benchtop planer, so it's kind of for home hobby use. This wouldn't be used commercially, certainly not at a sawmill. But if you look here, you can see there's the telltale marks of the blade that cut this from the log, and they're a little bit curved, as you can see here. And that tells me that it was a big round blade that cut this piece of wood. Sometimes sawmills have a bandsaw blade, not a circular saw blade, and the bandsaw marks would be directly across the piece of wood like that. It's also rough, although maybe not quite this rough. But for most projects that you're going to be building, so that would be interior woodwork, furniture, trim, built-ins, cabinet doors, stuff like that, planed is what you want. And planed is what you can buy from the stores. But planed is probably not all you're going to want to work with if you stick with woodworking. So aside from introducing you to rough and planed lumber, this is kind of a teaching tangent video in a way, because I'm going to be showing you things that you are not going to be able to put into use right now, because this isn't exactly beginner stuff, but it is where beginners might go. And you might find it interesting to just see what this is all about. I use my thickness planer quite a bit. And I wouldn't say my main use is for turning rough lumber smooth, although I do that. My main use for the thickness planer is to give me just the right thickness of wood for a project, so I don't have to work with standard thicknesses. Sometimes I want to use standard thicknesses, and those would be typically 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches. But what if the aesthetics of the project I'm working on looks best with 7/8 inch thick wood, for instance, or 1 3/8 inches, or let's say I need something quite thick and it's 1 7/8 inches, and so I would have to start with some 2-inch rough lumber. This machine here lets me get it right down to where it's ideal for the particular project I'm working with. So that's, I said, probably 70% of the time I use this machine is for those purposes. The other times it's just to make rough lumber smooth. I'm going to make this rough lumber smooth on camera so you can see how it all works. But before I do, I think you might find it interesting to take a look inside the planer. So I'm going to take the cover off. I'm going to show you a bit about how it works, and then we're going to use it. I've owned this thickness planer for, I don't know, at least 10 years, maybe 15, I can't really remember. DeWalt, one of many different brands that make thickness planers. There's a tool here. I've loosened these 4 screws so I can just lift the top off. Now I should say, in the interests of the whole teaching tangent thing, even though you may not have any power tools now, probably don't, when you get them, if you get them, you always must remember to unplug them before you actually go inside and work on them, just to be safe. I've unplugged it, but I never trust myself. We have multiple layers of safety, so I'm turning it on and off. Clearly it's not working. It's not going to start up. So I could talk a lot about what's going on in here, but I just wanted to show you the blades and how they work briefly. This particular planer is what's called a 13-inch planer, which means that it can accommodate a board 13 inches wide. It's pretty standard for benchtop planers like this. I'm going to take this shroud off, and you can see the business end of the machine. This is the cutter head, it's called, and it rotates very quickly. See, with the shroud removed, it's actually designed to lock. So even if I made the mistake of leaving it plugged in and I'm working on these blades and someone turns it on, it's still not going to revolve around. I wouldn't want to see it happen though, because the motor's going to try to make it revolve. But anyway, that's the cutter head right there. I'm going to push down the override thing here, and you can see it turn around. This particular head has 3 blades, and these blades do get dull from time to time, and when it's time to change them, you have to take out all of these machine screws here, put in a new blade. The new blades look like this. As I said, this machine takes 3, and this is a replacement set of blades. Quite sharp, and they're sharp on both sides, as you can see. So they're reversible. In other words, you wear out one side, so it's not planing so well. You can take the knives out, blades, knives. Those words are used interchangeably for this sort of thing. Turn it around, turn all of them around, and you've got fresh performance again. So that's it in a nutshell. There's not a whole lot of maintenance required for a machine like this. You do have to keep the blades sharp. You also need to wax the bed of the planer. Let me just show you here. So as you will see, the wood I'm going to plane for you as a demonstration slides in through here. It's drawn in by the machine itself, and this surface here needs to be fairly slippery. So every so often you put some paste wax on it and it'll perform a lot better. Right now I'll button the machine back up and fire it up, and we'll make some rough lumber smooth. So like I said, you don't need this. You shouldn't have this as a beginner, but I just want to show it to you so you can envision the future for yourself, possibly. One thing you notice about woodworking machines, and this applies across the board, is that they're effective, they're accurate, they're fast. They actually eliminate a lot of the skill you need, because they kind of deliver some skill on their own as far as accuracy goes. But you pay for that. And besides the price of buying the machine, you pay for it in noise and you pay for it in dust. All woodworking machines are pretty well. They're noisy. And so you need to protect yourself. Certainly hearing protection for this. You could argue whether you need eye protection for this, because the planing is going on right inside the machine. I'm not sure what could possibly fly out that would hit you. Nothing has ever flown out of a thickness planer in my time using one, but you know, your eyes are precious, so you might want to use some safety glasses too. You'll also notice that this machine is hooked up to that corrugated pipe. That goes to what's called a vacuum system, which sucks up the shavings and keeps things kind of neat and keeps the air kind of clean. There's still going to be fine dust floating around. So like I said, machines are great, but you pay for them in terms of noise and dust. If I didn't have this planer hooked up to that, and I was planing for, say, an hour, everything I could plane in an hour, you'd almost be knee-deep in shavings on the other side of this. So the vacuum system is pretty valuable. Step 1 would be to adjust the height of the cutter so that it matches the thickness of wood that we're starting with. So this wood is going to get thinner as we plane it, but right now we need for the board to be able to get through the machine unimpeded. Now it can, because there's nothing stopping it there, and that's because the cutter head is too high. So I'm going to lower the cutter head. Can you see how it's going down here? Now, different planers manage this differently, but look over here for a second. I'm going to keep lowering it down, and you see how that little indicator, it goes up as I push this down? Well, that's showing me the depth of cut that I would make here. So I've lowered it enough to the point where the blades that I showed you before will start to encounter the wood. Now, we don't want to take a huge cut initially, so I'm only going to take maybe 1/32 of an inch. And actually, hang on a second. And we're going to see how that goes. Now, one thing about rough lumber that I have mentioned in the course is not only is it rough, but it's not necessarily all that consistent in thickness from one end to the other. So that's another reason why lumber is planed, is so that it can be made more consistent. Just looking at it here, I can see some inconsistency. I mean, this looks to my eye to be somewhat thinner than that. Let me just go and grab a ruler. Let's just take a look, and we'll see. But you get to see some inconsistencies. So just hang on a second. Okay, so here's my trusty 6-inch steel ruler. Love this little tool. So what are we looking at there? We're looking at a 1/16 of an inch more than 3/4 of an inch. So you see that 24 mark there? That 24 mark that's 24/32 of an inch, which is 3/4 of an inch if you boil it down. And 3/4 of an inch is a standard lumber thickness. Now, let's look at the other side. And let's see here. Oh yeah, look at that. It's almost an inch. So actually, we need to set this machine for the thickest part of this board. And it's going to plane this end, but it's not going to plane this end at first until we progressively lower the cutter head down. So I'm going to put this through. It's going to cut the high parts. I'm going to get the board from the other side, as you'll see. I'm going to feed it through again after lowering the cutter head again. With this particular machine, I usually like to lower it about, a half of a turn with the crank handle, maybe 3/4 of the turn. Then that would advance the cut properly. But let's just see here. You see, now that's too tight. That's because I set the machine for the thin end of the board inadvertently. So let's just, there we go. Somewhere between a 32nd of an inch and a 1/16 would be a fine starting point. So I'm going to put on my earmuffs, and I'm going to put on my glasses, and I'm going to start up the vacuum system, and then I'm going to switch this on, and we're actually going to run this through. I'm going to run it through once, just once, and I'm going to shut it off so you can see what's going on. Okay, we were pretty conservative there. We actually didn't do very much planing, but that's good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to lower the cutter head, so we should plane back further. I'm going to give it a full turn since there's a long way to go down yet. But I'm just going to keep doing this, running it through the planer a few times, and then we'll be able to compare and see how it works out. So this is planed up quite nicely. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now. And not only is it smooth, but it's a consistent thickness all the way along. This piece of wood actually, I had this cut locally. It's from a local red oak tree. And it's air dried, which means it's never been in a kiln, which kind of speeds the drying up. But air-dried lumber, so lumber that hasn't been dried in a kiln, is actually kind of nicer to work with. It's a little less brittle. It's smooth. It planes a little more smoothly. This is actually a really nice piece of wood. I mean, we have a defect here. This is a grub that got into the log after it was cut. Another grub here. This is probably damage from powder post beetles. So if I'm using this for something, I'm going to cut off the waste. I'll plane the other side of course, too. But that's it. That's kind of the lesson in planed lumber, rough lumber, and how people can plane lumber in their own home shop with a benchtop thickness planer like that.